So I have some familiarity with form-based codes, and I unfortunately have firsthand familiarity with a failed effort to implement one. So just, a quick definition here just to make sure everyone's sort of on the same, up to speed to a minimum level. A form-based code is an alternative way to structure your zoning code as opposed to the use-based zoning that is prevalent throughout North America. A form-based code emphasizes the built form of the structures in a place rather than what is going on inside them. Are they residential? Are they commercial? Are they office, etc.? Form-based code emphasizes things, urban design characteristics. What is the setback from the street? How does the building engage the street and the sidewalk and the public realm? To some extent, architectural design standards, it can be more or less prescriptive on that, but with the idea that you want to create sort of a unified, not aesthetic, but environment where each building contributes to its broader urban environment instead of detracting from it. Form-based codes will typically regulate the bulk and the height and the massing of buildings, but within that framework, they will allow a lot more flexibility than conventional Euclidean zoning for mixing uses within a building or for being kind of agnostic as to what the use of a building is. You are not going to be prescriptive about, well, you have to be residential here and you can have a corner store on this block, but not on that one, and so on and so on. It's meant explicitly to facilitate the kind of mixed complete neighborhoods that we used to see prior to the suburban era, where the assumption was that you would want a mix of residences and businesses and workplaces in your neighborhood. And you would want to be able to live a life where you could walk between these things. The challenge, of course, is making the transition. I think the theoretical case that a form-based code is an improvement over conventional zoning, the theoretical case is really strong. The question as it was posed was, is it worth the fight? I have seen a lot of cities successfully implement form-based codes in a very limited way, often as a set of standards for one neighborhood. You'll see it in a downtown, or you'll see it in, an area where it's almost a pilot project, or where they're trying to build upon some traditional urban fabric that still exists. And very often, I'm seeing a comment actually in the chat about this from Andrew Burleson. Very often what happens is that you've got a constituency within the city, you've got staff in City Hall who are gung-ho about this, you've got elected officials who are on board, and they decide that the thing that is doable is, well, we're going to make this an overlay, a set of standards layered on top of the existing zoning in part of your city. The plus side of this is that it's usually doable as a political lift. Like, the number of people that have to be kind of on board with this is smaller. If you're doing it in your downtown district, you can get the business community, you can get the downtown improvement district on board. You can actually kind of rally the relevant stakeholders to support a plan and move forward with it. But its effectiveness, it doesn't affect your whole city. The impact becomes more limited, and it can make things more complicated because you're adding another layer of regulation. On the other hand, doing it citywide is a really, really daunting proposition. There are not a lot of good precedents for doing this successfully. Where I live in the city of Sarasota, Florida, we actually did have an effort to implement a form-based code citywide. They had sort of recognized the need for a major rewrite of the entire zoning code. Elected officials were on board. The city put together what they called their urban design studio, got a couple of high-powered designers to run it. They had this whole effort, huge public engagement process. At the end, they had done a significant amount of the work in developing a code that looked really promising. But what they hadn't done was really worked to ensure a resilient base of political support. We had some changes in who was in elected office, and we also had kind of not in my backyard constituencies that developed the idea that this was going to be, it was either going to be a giveaway to developers, or it was going to invite high density and congestion and traffic and all the sort of buzzwords that you hear. And there ended up being a really monstrous backlash to the idea of the form-based code. There had been a significant amount of public engagement, but you still had people who weren't on board, and they were able to mobilize this counter narrative that the community wasn't engaged and the community doesn't support this, and this is a radical experiment. And they essentially scared the city commission by 2018 into backing off of this effort that had begun in 2014. I think the groundwork had begun earlier than that. So it ended in kind of catastrophic failure, and it actually set back some much more modest zoning reforms that we would have had because they scrapped the entire form-based code. That's a cautionary tale, but I think that this is something that is popular among a subset of urban planners, urban designers, particularly new urbanist people who kind of get what it is and get the case for it. It's not necessarily easy to communicate to the broader public. you're going to face opposition. And I think there's a huge amount of softening the ground that has to happen first before you task staffers with actually starting to write this thing. Or, in this case, simply the appearance of unaccountability, which was not the reality, was enough for opponents to mobilize and scuttle it. It's tough. I think that I'm not convinced that a full form-based code initiative like that is ever going to be the low-hanging fruit in more than, a smaller community that can maybe pull it off. The benefits are obvious, but I think there are ways to make incremental changes to your zoning code that start where you stop digging holes, you stop prohibiting good things, you start allowing, you start allowing some good things that should be allowed, and you kind of build one common sense reform on another. My sense is it's more likely to get you where you need to be. I don't know. I can see both sides of that.